Today, we're looking at embracing work, re-embracing work. That's the title of the message. Let me ask you, when the alarm goes off in the morning, what kind of a feeling do you have? Do you have a feeling of, all right, we get to, trick question, huh? All right, I get to tackle this day. Yay, I can't wait to live this day. Or are you one of those that goes, pull the covers over my head. I want another 10 minutes of sleep. Well, I discovered this week that hitting the snooze button is not necessarily beneficial. Believe it or not. So let's take a look.
We all do it. In fact, I did it 3 times this morning. Everybody hits the snooze button. It's the gateway to that 10 minutes of extra sleep that you're certain you need in order to truly be ready to attack the day. It wasn't always called snoozing. Sleep scientists in the 1970s coined the term drockling to describe the action of drifting in and out of sleep in the morning. But hitting the drockling button didn't have a great ring to it, so the process became more commonly referred to as snoozing. Well, when you snooze, you actually lose. It turns out those extra Z's to which we treat ourselves are actually bad for you. According to Stanford University sleep specialist Rafael Pelayo, it confuses your body and brain. When your alarm goes off, that signals the end of your sleep cycle. When you hit the snooze button and fall back asleep, the cycle starts all over again. But when the alarm goes off again, your body thinks, wait, I'm not done with my new sleep cycle yet. And this leads to what the National Sleep Foundation defines as sleep inertia. It's the feeling of grogginess and disorientation that can come from awakening from a deep sleep. It slows down your ability to make decisions and hurts your overall performance. That feeling of grogginess can last around 90 minutes. Not a great way to start the day. But there are some things you can do to kick the habit of hitting the snooze button. First of all, obey your alarm. Get up when it goes off, and do it for a few days in a row. According to Pelayo, this will get your mind and body into a healthy rhythm. Another trick is to move your alarm further away from your bed than you're used to, so you have to get up to shut it off. Finally, just get more sleep. Go to bed earlier, and you'll feel the difference. Together, we can break this vicious cycle of snoozing.
Well, so maybe you're a snoozer, maybe you're not, but now you know the truth, right? So we'll let you deal with it on your own time, in your own way. Wow. Re-embracing work. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 and 24. I just want to read a couple of verses before we dive in here today and talk about work. Really in your lesson, this is about vocational alignment. In your small group, you'll talk about being in alignment, spirit, soul, and body. But today we'll just kind of give an overview. But in Colossians chapter 3, I'm going to start at verse 22. It actually says slaves. Today it would probably be more appropriate to say employees. Employees, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to win favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Now verse 23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for his wrong, and there's no favoritism. So Paul is writing to this church in Colossae, and he says, listen, he said, if you want to really engage in your work with God's perspective, then do it this way. He said, make sure that you're working for the Lord, not for man. Not when he's watching you, he or she is watching you. That's what the culture does, right? The boss is around, we work hard, we work right. The boss is not around, what would he do? We slack. Paul says that's not the way we as Christians should work. We should work as unto the Lord, not for men. Amen. And he said if your boss is doing something wrong, God's going to fix it. He's going to point it out. We don't have to worry. We don't have to fret. Maybe he might use this. Maybe he won't. But if he does, God's the one in charge. And so we have to let him do his thing in our workplaces. When I was thinking about today's message, I was thinking about the fact that most of us grew up or grow up having the question or thinking about, what am I going to do when I grow up, right? And people ask you that question. What are you going to do when you grow up? Most of us have an idea of what we'd like to do when we grow up, so to speak. But then when we get to that place where we're going to actually pursue it, it requires some type of either on-the-job training or some type of experience or some type of education in order to pursue that job. So that's kind of stage two. Stage one is what I want to do when I grow up. Stage two is, okay, I'm going to get set and prepared to dive into this job. And then stage three is, do I really like it after I'm here? See, some people go through stage one and stage two. They get to stage three. They get in the job and they think, I don't really like this. This is not me. I thought I would, but I don't. Now, my generation, we oftentimes, or most of us, we locked into a job and we did it all the way through to the end, to retirement, so to speak. But that's not the case with my children and the generation behind me. They're going to do something for about 10 years, and they're going to switch to something else they like. That's just the way that they're designed. They're not going to start something and go 30 years or 40 years in that job. They're going to go about 5 or 10 or maybe 15, switch to something else they like, switch to something else they like. That's just the way they're wired. And so we're in a whole different mentality of how we do work in our day and time, and even with the generation that's coming after us. Well, today we're going to start in and look at a question, and it says, is work a delight or a necessary drag for you? Is work a delight or a necessary drag for you? Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, and a lot of the book of Ecclesiastes is written from the standpoint of God's perspectives is not in it. In other words, he pulled out the God factor and he put in the human factor, and that's what he wrote. But every once in a while, Solomon will drop a God factor in the midst of Ecclesiastes. And so this is one of these verses where he dropped in God's perspective, and it had to do with work. Solomon didn't need to work. He didn't need, he was the richest man. I mean, the Amazon guy and the whoever do you think is the richest man in the world, he paled compared to Solomon. Solomon, he didn't need to work to provide for his family. But this is his viewpoint when God's involved in relation to work. Here's what he says. He said, it is a good thing to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it. And to enjoy your work and accept your lot in life, this is indeed a gift from God. So Solomon, even though he didn't need to work, he could have pleasured himself out. The fact is, he realized that work is a good thing and that it is actually a gift from God. And so we need to begin to realize and understand that God designed us to have our work as a delight, not something that we drag through. There may be days or there may be moments, but it shouldn't be a lifetime of dragging through. It should be a delight for us. And if we're not there yet, then perhaps the Lord is nudging us to change or to switch. So a couple of things under that. First of all, God designed us to work. God designed us to work. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, it says, the Lord God took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. God himself is a worker. It says he rested from his work. And you start the first part of Genesis chapter 2. He rested from his work. He put us in the garden. He put Adam and Eve in the garden to work it. If you look up that Hebrew word work, what you will find is it means to dress it or to serve it. That's what it means. And obviously that makes sense in the context of a garden. You're going to dress the plants that are there. You're going to take care of them. You're going to serve the plants that are there, whatever's needed in order to make it beautiful what God has provided. The word to take care of there, which he's put Adam and Eve in the garden to work it and to take care of it. The word work or take care of it means to keep, guard, and observe. to keep what's there, to guard what's there, because there's an enemy. There was an enemy to the garden, wasn't it? To guard and then to observe how God works through your work. And so again, we get in the definitions of those two words, work and take care of it. You'll find that. So the garden obviously was not routine. It was not static. There was things happening all the time. There was a process that was going on, and he placed Adam and Eve in that as his work in order to take care of the garden. And many of you perhaps have maybe gone on a drive, or you have driving home. You've seen the change of the leaves and the trees and everything. What is that? That's the work of nature that God is displaying before us, and we go on incredible drives, and we're like, ooh, that's so amazing. Well, that's just the work of nature that we are enjoying what God is doing and benefiting from it. Now, God designed us to work. Now, this may shock you. I think it's kind of cool. That is, I've discovered that work still happens in heaven. You're like, what? I thought it was the time to be on the beach and drink orange juliuses and just kick back. Well, it says in Scripture that there'll be no more sea. So if there's no more sea, there's no more beaches. I'll just wait and see, right? So we dive in. I want you to turn to Isaiah chapter 65, and I'm going to go to Revelation. I'm going to read something in Revelation I want you to hear, but I want you to be in Isaiah 65, starting in verse 17. I want you to see this as I read it in Isaiah. I'm going to be using the NIV translation, but I'm going to go to Revelation first, and we're going to look at the fact, does work happen in heaven? So again, you're probably already in Isaiah 65, so just listen for a moment in this passage here in Revelation. Revelation 21, 1 through 5. The Apostle John is seeing into heaven. He says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. There it is. And I saw the holy city and the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, mourning, crying, pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Get that? Present tense. I am making. If you look up that word making, you will find that it means to produce, to construct, to form, and to fashion. So God's in heaven. He hasn't stopped working. He says, I am making all things new in this new place. I am producing it. I am constructing it. I'm forming it, and I'm fashioning it. Making all things new. Now let's jump into Isaiah chapter 65, starting in verse 17. Listen to the similarities. Isaiah was seeing into heaven. John was seeing into heaven. Listen to the similarities of terminology. Isaiah says, behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former thing will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. The old way of how we understand work will not come to mind. There'll be a new understanding. Verse 18, but be glad and rejoice forever that I will create, for I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and of crying will be heard in it no more. Never again will there be an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his years, who dies at 100. Will be thought a mere youth. So you're dying at 100, but you're thought of as a mere youth. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. Do you know life insurance policies right now? The life expectancy that they're putting on life insurance policies right now is in the early 90s. They're expecting people in life insurance policies. I took one out about a year ago. Not expecting to die anytime soon, but I thought it was interesting. They had me categorized at dying at 91. So a lot of years ahead of me, folks. A lot of years. Verse 21, look at what he says. Look at the construction, the building. They will build houses and dwell on them. They will plant vineyards and eat from their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat them. For as the days of a tree, what? What is that? For as the days of a tree. Let me jump to Psalms 92. Talk about a tree for a moment. Psalms 92, 12 through 14 says this: the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in the old age, and they will stay fresh and green. For in the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will enjoy the works of their hands. They will not toil in vain or bear children doomed to misfortune. They will be a people blessed by the Lord, and they and their descendants with them. Isn't that amazing? I was reading through my devotions and happened to come across that verse, and the Lord brought it back again. The fact that God is designed us and looking for us to live to 100, and people at 100 think it's mere youth. Now that's not the way we think, is it? Nor that our culture is designed to think. But that's the way God thinks. And there's building going on. After Isaiah just described heaven, there's building going on in heaven. So how do we interpret all this? I say this, that we need a work order. We need a work order here on earth. What is that? It really boils down to two things, and Jesus told us that. He said, first of all, our work order is to believe. John 6:29, Jesus answered and said, the work of God is this, to believe in the one that he has sent. You know, if you're in a tough spot or a challenging moment, it takes work to believe. It takes work to hope. It takes work sometimes to say, I'm going down and I'm never coming up. It takes work to believe that God can actually take you from the pit and put you in the palace. It takes work to believe. And Jesus said that's the thing we need to focus on. Not the situation we're in, but actually the faith and belief that he could get us out or get us through. That's the important thing. And the second thing that Jesus said is his work order and becomes ours is to complete our assignment. Do you know you've been given an assignment from the Lord? You've been given an assignment. Jesus completed his assignment. Let me read it to you. In John chapter 17, verse 4, he says, I have brought you glory on earth by completing the work you gave me to do. Jesus called it work. In the earlier, he said the work of God is to believe. Both words are the same. Both words are the same. Work. They mean toil, act of hands, or of the mind. That's what that word means, work. Toil. act of our hands or of the mind that we work. You see, Jesus completed his assignment here on earth, but he was given a new assignment in heaven. When you complete one assignment, you're given a new one. There's always a new one available. Always a new one. And so Jesus completed his assignment here on earth. It was to go to the cross. It was to die in our place so that we could be free. That was his assignment. He prayed that in John 17 before he went to the cross. And then he completed it. He said, God, I've done this. I'm finished. But what's he doing now? He's got a new assignment. Romans chapter 8 says that he is interceding in heaven for you and I right now. That's his new assignment. So he didn't go to heaven and just say, well, I'm done, prop up my feet, wait until the Father says, go get the guys and gals. No, he's working in heaven. He's got a new assignment. And so you and I have our assignment from the Lord that we need to understand. Now, let me ask you another question. Number 2, what happened to our view of work? What happened to our view of work? In Ecclesiastes chapter 2:11, again, this is Solomon writing absent of God's view. Here's what he says. He said, yet when I surveyed all that my hands have done, and when I toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. Again, that's Solomon saying what work is like without God's perspective. I pulled up a TED Talk this week of a guy talking on the subject, why work. Thought it was fascinating. It was an author that just published a book. I don't know when and where. I didn't really get into the details of the dates. But I thought it was fascinating that he began to relay the history of what we would call a successful nation and how it developed. You know, first of all, you got to feed yourself. And if you don't have good agriculture, if you don't feed yourself and clothe yourself and get some education, you're not going to go anywhere. We achieved that as a nation. And next we went into the Industrial Revolution. And he began to give the history of that. And there was a guy named Adam Smith who is considered the father of the modern industrial movement. And Adam Smith believed 2 things about human nature. He believed that human nature was lazy and that human nature needed to be told what to do. That's the father of modern industrialism. That's the guy that designed where we're going. He said at the base, human nature is lazy and they need to be told what to do. And so obviously we appreciate capitalism because capitalism, people can start something. I mean, they don't need the government's permission to start something. They just go out and what's on their heart, they begin to start something. Entrepreneurs, whatever, they just develop it. They just grow it. And so we appreciate capitalism, but then what Adam Smith did is that he took capitalism and he put it into factories and warehouses and call centers because that was efficient. But what happened in that process is it began to take people that were designed by God to be creative. He began to put them in a routine task, and the only reward that they would get from their works was money. That's it. Now, we appreciate getting paid for our work, but that is not the reason you enjoy your work. In fact, if we say to somebody, they're in it for the money, they're in it for the money, that is not a descriptive term, that's a judgment. They're not in it for the right reasons. And so while we appreciate getting rewarded by money, that's not why we are working and enjoy our work. It's not about the money. It's about everything else that happens at our job. Perhaps our creativity, or those that we work with, that we socialize with, or those that we have built friendships with, or that we get to participate in the vision and the mission of that organization, and we get to embrace it together, and everybody says, yes, we have a goal, yes, we achieved it. It's like a community effort together. That's why we enjoy our job. It's not the fact that we get paid or maybe get a bonus at the end of the year. And yet, how many people work And it just gets dumbed down to that. What a boring way to live. That's not how God designed us to live. Now, I'm not saying if you like routine that you're not a godly person. I'm not saying that at all, because some people enjoy routine, but at some other place in their life, they have a creative bent that they like to do. They may not be able to do it on their day job, so to speak, but they express themselves creatively what God has designed, perhaps on their own time or in the evening or starting a second business because of the creativity that God put in them. And so Adam Smith, again, he brought us to this place where capitalism took this turn and put everybody in routine factories and call centers and places where the only reward was money. What a tragedy. Because that's not why we enjoy our job. Couple of points there, just in summary. Everything gets based on material rewards, and the Industrial Revolution brought routine without creativity. Routine without creativity. See, that wasn't the way. The world has changed. That wasn't the way it was for generations. For generations, it was a family business. And we were born into that family. You picked up the family business and you began to learn it from your dad or your grandpa or your uncle. And then you stepped in and you took the business further than they did. That was how the process worked for generations and generations and generations. But we're at a new place. We're at a new place where that doesn't happen anymore. And not that it doesn't happen, it's rare. That we kind of decide what we want to do and we get educated and we step into that place. And then we try to figure out if we like it or not. And sometimes it's a bomb and other times it's great. And then we start new. But that wasn't how it was for centuries and generations. It was always came up through the family or through something that was happening in the town. And then we adopted it and embraced it. But we're at a whole new level. We're like, we're a global society, so to speak. We're one big city across this world. So we're a whole new place. But yet I think that's really exciting place. And to realize that where we've come from and where we're going is going to take a new way of thinking. It's going to take don't resign from your job tomorrow and don't revolt. Just say, God, what do I do next? Okay? But we really work because there's something invigorating about what we're doing. There's something that is stimulating about what we're doing. There's something that is meaningful. There's something that may be important. There's something that we think we're going to make a difference. That's why we enjoy our job. Yes, we're blessed that we get paid, that we can food and have some extra time and so forth. But the fact is that the other factors make the job meaningful, not the fact that we get paid. So when Jesus becomes Lord, number 3, when Jesus becomes Lord, he redeems everything. He redeems everything. When I say everything, I mean everything, including our work and perspective of work. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whatever you do. I don't know what all you do, but whatever you do. Earlier he says, whether you eat or drink, as mundane as that. Whatever you do, do for the glory of God. That's what we're called. I've had a lot of different jobs in my life. I started out, I mentioned last week, on the farm. Started out farming in various areas of that. And then I think for a summer I put metal roof on houses. It was a fairly hot job. The next summer in between school, I went and helped to build a dam. That's not a cuss word. That's an actual place that you hold back water, right? And I drove one of those big trucks with tires on it bigger than me. That was a lot of fun. Had a great time that summer building that dam. And then afterwards, I worked for a professor doing research. Very different from the other two. But I had a good time doing research that summer. And then after school, I worked as a manufacturer's rep for 2.5 years. I traveled up and down the East Coast and out into the Midwest. And then I met Wanda, and I said, I'm not traveling anymore. I want to stay home with this amazing woman. So I tried to find a place in the company, and that didn't work out, so I resigned. I quit. And I built houses for a year. Had a great time building houses for a year. And then after that, I started in ministry. And when I first started in ministry, I was an intern in this huge United Methodist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And had a great time there. It was fantastic, just learning and understanding how things operated at that particular level, that size. And then I started pastoring 6 years in my hometown and now 20 years here in Winchester. So each one of those jobs had pros and cons. But honestly, as I look back, none of them were really a drag. I enjoyed all of them. I learned things through all the process of all the different things that I did and had a great time doing them. I found this week where Billy Graham had written down 5 things that he felt from the Lord of how we should view our jobs or our vocation or work. 5 things. I thought, this is pretty good. So I stole them from Billy Graham. No, I borrowed them. I borrowed them from Billy Graham. And I think he would be blessed. He said, first of all, work is a gift from God. We mentioned that. Adopt that perspective because that's the God one. Work is a gift from God. Number 2, those who are able to work should work. Those who are able to work should do so. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, 10 through 12. Here it says, the Apostle Paul, even while we were with you, we gave you this rule. Whoever does not work should not eat. Yet we hear that some of you are living idle lives, refusing to work and wasting time meddling in other people's business. In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, we appeal to such people. No, we command them. Listen to him. He's changing his mind in the middle of the sentence. Settle down and get to work. Earn your living. And I say to the rest of you, dear brothers and sisters, never tire of doing good work. That's the Apostle Paul. Do you understand that when there's no work in a society, what that society looks like? Really? Do you want to live there? It's full of poverty. It's full of crimes. It's full of alcoholics. It's full of drug addicts. It's full of people that are meddling in other people's business. That's what happens in areas or societies or nations that don't have enough work. I applaud companies that hire felons when they come out of prison. I think that's the greatest thing because the first thing that gal and guy needs to do is get back to work. Because if they don't, what's going to happen? They're going to rethink this whole thing, and before long they'll be back doing the same thing they were sent in for because there's not been provided work. I talked to a guy just last Sunday that he was in prison in the 80s, and then he became a prison chaplain. And several years ago, I don't know how long, in Pennsylvania, he was from Pennsylvania, he said that the law changed in Pennsylvania, and in one day he was fired. The prison loved him. They thought he was amazing, but he was fired. He cannot be a prison chaplain anymore to go into any prison in Pennsylvania because he had served time in the 80s. He's done. That's a tragedy. But that's also an example of the law. The law never forgives. Only Jesus forgives. And he sets you free. And when you're free indeed. Amen. That's and so, and yet there's companies today they're called felon friendly. Don't let that scare you. It's just honest. It's just people that have oftentimes made a mistake. And if they knew the consequences of what they were walking into, they never would have walked into it. But they just absolutely messed up. So I applaud companies that hire felons and put them back to work. Number 3, think of God. Think as if God is your boss. That's a new perspective, isn't it? I read Colossians opening up. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. And then this is a biggie. Take time to rest from your work. Take time to rest from your work. In Mark chapter 2, 27 and 28, Jesus said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. What's he saying there? He's saying basically that he was being called on the carpet by the Pharisees because he was out gathering kernels of wheat to eat as he walked through the wheat field. And they said, you're working. Really? I'm sure that those same Pharisees picked up a knife and a fork and got the food off their plate on the Sabbath and fed their face. And Jesus is out walking through a wheat field, picking kernel out of the wheat. They said he was working and they're not. Come on. But that's what the Pharisees did. And Jesus said, listen, the Sabbath is not to lord over you. The Sabbath has a special place in your life for you to stop and reflect and to worship and to keep perspective as you journey through life. See, if you pride yourself in working 70 or 80 hours a week, what you're saying is that work is the center of my life. But when you work hard and work long, but you take a Sabbath, you're saying, I love what I do, and I might work longer than the average person because I enjoy what I do, but I'm going to take a Sabbath. I'm going to rest. I'm going to reflect. I'm going to worship because I want to make sure I have the proper perspective walking through life. Not just what the culture brings on me. I want to have God's perspective when I walk through. I want it to be meaningful. Hating your work does nobody any good. Not you. It wrecks your health. It poisons all the conversations that you have around people. And the boss can't stand you because you hate what you do. It does no one any good to hate what you do. And sometimes we just need a different perspective. If you're in small group this week, you're going to watch a clip from the music box. It's a short film, about 30 minutes long. You can find it on YouTube if you want to watch the whole thing, but there's 2 clips. And one clip is when the man is at his job and he didn't have the music inside of him. And the second clip is after he discovered the music box and the music went inside of him. And there's a whole different picture going on in the second picture than the first. Doing the same job, but clearly a different man. It happens when we rest and take time to rest. Man told me one time, he said, I worked 7 days a week just to think, I'm going to get ahead. Never got ahead. He said, in fact, I got more behind. And when I stopped and said, you know what, I'm going to take a Sabbath. I'm going to rest one day a week. Then he said, yeah, I started getting refreshed. And I started making progress that I wanted to make. Didn't happen 7 days a week. It happened when I honored the Lord's way. So take time to rest. And then finally, stay young as you grow old. Stay young as you grow older. Isaiah 65, I'll just read it again. Never again will there be an infant who lives but for a few days, and an old man who does not live out his years. Who dies at 100 will be thought of as a mere youth, and who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. Wow. Exciting days ahead, right? Amen. So 5 things, perspective about your job. Number 4, engage in a new work release. All right, so let's try a new work release. I just have 2 things, and that is, first of all, learn to be creative in your craft. Learn to be creative in your craft. That's what God has designed you to do. He's designed you to be creative. I'm not saying if you like routine, then that's the way God designed you, then love routine. But He's also called us to be creative in what we do through life. And realize that He's put that in you. And I don't know what that means, where you work and what you do to be creative. But just understand that if you're drudging through life thinking, where is this going? I'll never get out. First of all, you can. That's a lie you're believing, because God's going to lead you through, because He wants you to be delighted in the work that you do. Because you're not doing it for the company or for the employee. You're doing it as unto the Lord. And so when you begin to change these perspectives, then we come into alignment in our vocation in a fresh way. And we love it, and those around us love it as well. So be creative. You say, I'm not sure I can do something new. Well, let me give you some hope here. In Exodus chapter 35, there's a story about Moses wanting to build the tabernacle. And the Lord selected two men. Their name is Bezalel and Oliab. Good Christian young Jewish guys. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon them. When was the last time that you couldn't do anything and you stopped and said, Spirit of the Lord, come upon me to do this task? That's the way we need to be thinking. It's tough right now. Spirit of the Lord, come upon me that I can actually have a good attitude when my boss doesn't. Spirit of the Lord, come upon me. Things are at a rough place right now. God, you need to show me through. You know, Spirit, when was the last time you prayed? That's what we need to be praying. Spirit of the Lord. And so it says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon them. Now listen to this. Verse 34 of Exodus 35, it says, and He gave both him, he was talking about Bezalel, and Oliab, the ability to teach others their skills. It says that right in Scripture. So it wasn't just them doing it. He also gave them the ability to teach others around them what God had put in them. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And that's what God wants to do with you. He wants to give you such an attitude and understanding about work that you actually teach others how to catch it and enjoy what they do, even if they need to get a different job. So what? It's better for them to enjoy what they do. And then the last thing that I want to mention is when you lose your perspective, get yoked with Jesus. Matthew 11, 28 through 30 says this, probably familiar, many of you know it, but if you've not heard it before, this is good. Jesus says, come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. What's happened? You've lost your perspective. Take my yoke upon you. Let me just back up. Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. Then in verse 29, he says, now this is where we go from here. All right? He's given us rest. We've stopped. He said, now this is where we go from here. He says this, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Do you think Jesus had a rhythm in work? Absolutely. He had a good one. He says, learn from me. And so it's so easy to pick up from the culture, but do we pick up from Jesus and learn from Him how to do our job and do it well? He says, learn from me. He says, for I am gentle and humble in heart. He's not going to whip you. He's not going to slap you. He's not going to condemn you. He's going to say, you know what? Let's rest a while. Now, when we start again, you need to get, what does that mean? Well, again, from an agriculture background, they had harnesses they put on the necks of oxen or horses, and they were yoked together. They were together. And so many of you know this before, that one horse pulling weight, if you yoke two together, they will actually pull 3 times the amount, not double the amount. So the teaching in that is that when you get yoked with Jesus, you're going to do 3 times the amount that you normally would by yourself. And even if you yoked up with somebody else, but when you yoke up with Jesus, there's going to be, multiplication that happens. And he says this, he says, you'll find rest for your soul. And that's really what we're looking for, even in the midst of our job, finding rest for our soul. He says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Let me ask you a couple of questions and we're going to close. Is work a necessary drag for you? That's the question. If it is, start asking God for direction. Because He wants us to delight in what we do. Start asking Him for direction. Let the music come inside of us instead of realizing that there's music out there that we don't know about yet. I'm referring to the music box. Have you bought into the line that in your work that you're just stuck? There's no way out. There's no way forward. There's no way, you're bored. There's no way. Have you bought into that line that you're just stuck? That's a lie. Because there's always a way out with God. There's always a way through with Him. And we have to re-examine our belief. Jesus says the work is to believe, to stay in believing. Work is a gift. Everyone who can work should. God is your true boss. Take time to rest and stay young as you grow older.